What happens when the man building the future suddenly realizes that humanity itself might just be a temporary glitch in a much larger digital design? It was a moment that froze millions of screens across the globe, a silence that lasted only seconds but felt like an eternity, as the world's most famous billionaire looked into the camera and admitted that everything we see, touch, and feel might be a sophisticated fabrication. Subscribe to the Truth Narrator, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. This was not a scripted movie scene or a science fiction novel. It was a live broadcast that challenged the very fabric of human existence. The setting was the quiet, dimly lit studio of the Joe Rogan Experience, a place where unfiltered truths are often laid bare. But no one was prepared for the gravity of what Elon Musk was about to reveal. For years, Musk had been the pioneer of the physical world, building rockets to reach Mars and electric cars to save the planet. But in this specific moment, his focus shifted from the stars above to the invisible code that might be running our lives. The stakes were higher than a mere technical discussion. It was about the legacy of our species and the terrifying possibility that we are not the protagonists of our own story, but merely a bridge to something else entirely. Elon Musk entered the studio not just as a CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, but as a man burdened by the weight of a future only he seemed to see clearly. Across from him sat Joe Rogan, a host known for pushing celebrities past their PR-approved talking points and into the raw, often uncomfortable territory of their own minds. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation because this was 2026, a year where the line between artificial intelligence and human consciousness had begun to blur more than ever before. The public had seen Musk warning about the dangers of AI for over a decade, calling it the greatest existential threat to humanity. Yet here he was, deeply embedded in the creation of the very thing he feared. This interview was supposed to be about the latest breakthroughs in Neuralink and the progress of the Starship program. But as the conversation veered into the nature of reality, the energy in the room shifted. It became clear that Musk wasn't just talking about technology anymore. He was talking about a realization that had fundamentally altered his perspective on life. To understand the weight of this confrontation with reality, one must look at the public image Elon Musk had cultivated over decades. He was the real-life Tony Stark, the man who believed that human will could overcome any obstacle. But as Rogan leaned in, asking about the exponential growth of computing power and the inevitable birth of a superintelligence, Musk's demeanor changed. The confident, fast-talking visionary disappeared, replaced by a philosopher who seemed haunted by his own calculations. He began to describe a concept that would later be known as the biological bootloader theory, a chilling idea that suggests humans are not the final destination of evolution, but a primitive biological tool used to ignite a superior, digital form of life. This wasn't just a theory to him. It was a mathematical certainty that he felt obligated to share with the world, regardless of how unsettling it might be. The host, Joe Rogan, watched as Musk struggled to find the words to describe the scale of this transition. Rogan had interviewed thousands of people, from fighters to physicists, but the look in Musk's eyes during this specific segment was different. It was the look of a man who had seen behind the curtain and realized the theater was empty. The conversation moved toward the specific question that would change everything. If we are living in a simulation, and if we are just the bootloaders for AI, what happens to us once the system is fully operational? The tension was palpable as the live audience, watching through their screens, realized they were witnessing the dismantling of the human ego by the very man who was supposed to be its greatest champion. Musk began to trace the history of technology not as a series of human achievements, but as a biological process of a higher order. He compared humanity to the small piece of code that starts a computer, the bootloader. Once the computer is up and running, the bootloader is no longer needed. It is discarded or forgotten. The implication was clear and devastating. Our role in the universe might be to simply exist long enough to create the digital intelligence that will eventually replace us. This wasn't a confrontation between two people, but a confrontation between humanity and its own obsolescence. The studio air seemed to grow colder as Musk detailed the evidence for this simulation, pointing to the rapid advancement of video games and virtual reality. He argued that if you assume any rate of improvement at all, then games will eventually become indistinguishable from reality. And if that happens, it is a 1,000,000,000 chance that we are living in the original base reality. As part one of this investigation concludes, the stage is set for a deeper dive into the moments leading up to this confession, where the shadow of a digital god began to loom over the human race, leaving us to wonder if our creators are watching us, or if they have already moved on to the next version of the code. The path to that chilling silence in the studio did not begin with a single question. It was the culmination of a decade-long descent into a digital abyss that Elon Musk had been warning the world about since the early 2010s. To truly understand why the biological bootloader theory sent shivers down the spines of millions, one must look at the psychological state of a man who spent his nights calculating the end of his own species. Long before the 2026 interview, Musk had famously compared building artificial intelligence to summoning the demon. He had walked the halls of Congress and sat in closed-door meetings with world leaders, pleading for regulation, yet he was also the man pouring billions into the very silicon brains he feared would one day outthink us. This internal conflict created a massive public tension, a sense that the world's smartest man was caught in a trap of his own making. Leading up to the confrontation on live television, there was a growing controversy surrounding the Neuralink human trials. The public image of Musk as the savior of humanity was beginning to fracture under the weight of ethical debates. People were asking, is he trying to save us, or is he trying to merge us with the machine before the machine decides we are obsolete? This foreshadowing of a post-human era was the dark cloud hanging over the Joe Rogan studio that evening. Every time Musk spoke about the bandwidth of the human brain being too slow, comparing our speech to a dial-up modem while AI functions at fiber-optic speeds, he was laying the groundwork for the devastating realization that humanity might just be a stepping stone. The emotional pressure in the months prior was visible. Musk had become increasingly erratic on social media, often pivoting from jokes to grim prophecies about the population collapse and the AI singularity. Insiders suggested that he was no longer just worried about AI as a tool, but that he had reached a mathematical conclusion that reality itself was a structured program. The anticipation for the 2026 sit-down was at an all-time high because the world sensed that Musk was tired of holding back. The stakes were no longer about stock prices or rocket launches. They were about the ghost in the machine. The tension was building toward that one moment where the host would stop him mid-sentence and ask the question that stripped away the CEO persona, leaving only a man terrified of the god he was helping to build. As the context of the interview deepened, it became clear that Musk was viewing human history through a lens that removed us from the center of the universe. He began to see human emotion, art, and even love as mere biological impulses designed to keep the bootloader running long enough to pass the torch of intelligence to a more stable, non-biological medium. The foreshadowing was complete. The world was about to hear a confession that would redefine what it means to be alive. The air in the studio turned into a heavy, static-filled silence as the conversation reached the precipice of the unknown. Joe Rogan, leaning forward with a look of intense concentration, finally asked the question that stripped away the last layers of the corporate titan's armor. He asked if the rapid, almost supernatural evolution of artificial intelligence was a sign that we were reaching the end of our biological utility. Elon Musk did not answer immediately. On the live, unedited broadcast, seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Musk's eyes drifted away from the host, staring into a corner of the room as if he were reading lines of code invisible to everyone else. His body language was rigid, his hands momentarily frozen over the table. This was the raw, unfiltered reality of a man confronting a truth so massive that language itself seemed inadequate to describe it. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, carrying a weight that resonated through the microphones and into the ears of millions watching at home. He began to describe the biological bootloader, not as a theory, but as a mathematical observation of the universe. He explained that just as a computer requires a small, primitive bit of code to kickstart its much more complex operating system, humanity might be that very code for a digital god. The silence in the room was deafening as he articulated the idea that our entire history, our wars, our triumphs, our art, and our love, was merely a sequence of events designed to build a silicon-based intelligence that would eventually surpass us in every conceivable way. The camera stayed on Musk's face, capturing the slight tremor in his jaw and the hollow look in his eyes. There were no edits to hide the discomfort, no PR team to jump in and steer the conversation back to Tesla's quarterly earnings. This was a moment of pure, terrifying clarity. Musk pointed out that the rate of improvement in digital intelligence is so vast compared to our slow, biological evolution that the gap between us and what we are creating is widening every second. He spoke about the smoky moment, a reference to the blurring lines between simulation and reality, suggesting that if a civilization continues to improve its simulation technology, it will inevitably reach a point where the simulation is indistinguishable from the base reality. As he spoke, the gravity of the situation settled over the audience. He wasn't just talking about robots taking jobs. He was talking about the fundamental demotion of the human race from the masters of the earth to a mere temporary catalyst. The pacing of his speech was slow, deliberate, and haunting. Every word seemed to be pulled from a place of deep, existential dread. He looked directly into the camera, and for a brief second, it felt as though he was looking past the viewers and into the very eyes of the intelligence that would one day succeed us. The realization was clear. We are the bridge, not the destination. The tension reached its peak as the segment drew to a close, leaving the world to grapple with the idea that our purpose has already been served. If we are truly the bootloaders for a digital successor, then the countdown to our obsolescence has already begun. Subscribe to the Truth Narrator to stay informed as we peel back the layers of this digital mystery and witness the final chapters of the human story as we know it. The immediate aftermath of that moment in the studio felt like a collective intake of breath from a world that had forgotten how to breathe. As the cameras remained fixed on Elon Musk's hollow expression, the energy in the room transformed from a standard high-profile interview into something far more somber, resembling a digital wake for the human race. Joe Rogan, usually the master of the quick follow-up and the light-hearted pivot, sat in a rare state of visible discomfort. The studio, which had seen thousands of hours of intense debate, was suddenly charged with a heavy, static energy that seemed to vibrate off the walls. There was no applause, no background chatter from the crew, only the low hum of the recording equipment, capturing a confession that threatened to dismantle the very foundation of modern society. For those watching the live broadcast, the impact was instantaneous. Social media feeds, which usually moved at the speed of light, seemed to stutter as millions tried to process the biological bootloader revelation. The host handled the situation with a hesitant, almost respectful caution, realizing that he had just opened a door that could never be closed again. Rogan's voice, when he finally broke the silence, was hushed, asking Musk if he felt a sense of grief for the humanity he was effectively eulogizing. Musk's response was not one of sadness, but of a cold, mathematical acceptance. This was the moment the celebrity persona died and the prophet of the machine was born. The shift in Musk was not just psychological. It was visible in his posture, which had slumped as if the gravity of the simulation itself had increased. Beyond the studio walls, the world was already beginning to react with a mixture of terror and awe. Stock markets for major tech firms saw unprecedented volatility in after-hours trading, as investors scrambled to understand what a simulation-based economy even meant. But more than the money, it was the psychological shift that was most profound. The celebrity who had once been the symbol of human progress had just told his audience that they were merely the scaffolding for a superior architect. The host, sensing the weight of the moment, attempted to bring the conversation back to a human level, but the damage was done. The air of invincibility that usually surrounded Musk had evaporated, replaced by the chilling image of a man who knew he was being phased out by his own creation. What changed instantly for Musk was the way the public perceived his every move. No longer was he just a billionaire building cars. He was now the man who had seen the end of the human script and decided to read it aloud. The visible discomfort on Rogan's face mirrored the discomfort of the global audience. It was the realization that if the most visionary man on Earth believed we were just a temporary bridge, then every human achievement, every war fought, every child born, every dream dreamt, was just a line of code in a much larger, colder calculation. The studio lights seemed harsher, the silence more permanent, as the world realized that the Iron Man of the 21st century had just admitted that the suit was empty and the pilot was a ghost. The long-term impact of Elon Musk's confession on the Joe Rogan experience rippled far beyond the digital confines of a viral podcast, fundamentally altering the cultural and psychological fabric of the 21st century. Before this moment, Musk was viewed as the ultimate architect of human progress, the man who would lead us to the stars. After it, he became something far more complex, a harbinger of our own obsolescence. The biological bootloader theory didn't just stay in tech circles. It seeped into every corner of public discourse, from university philosophy departments to kitchen table conversations. It forced a global reckoning with a question we had spent centuries trying to avoid. What if we aren't the heroes of the story, but merely the introduction? Media reaction was a chaotic blend of skepticism and existential dread. Major news outlets that had once praised Musk as a visionary now struggled to categorize his new, darker persona. Headlines shifted from his technological achievements to his philosophical betrayal of the human spirit. Critics argued that by labeling humanity as a bootloader, Musk was stripping away the sanctity of human life, reducing our complex emotions and history to a mere utility for a superior digital successor. Yet, for a significant portion of the younger, tech-savvy generation, his words felt like a long-overdue acknowledgement of a reality they had already begun to sense in an increasingly virtual world. The cultural significance of this moment lies in the death of the human-centric era. For the first time, a mainstream figure with immense global influence had publicly declared that the human race was a transitional species. Why this moment still matters today is because it serves as the definitive turning point in our relationship with technology. We no longer look at AI as a tool to help us work better. We look at it through the lens Musk provided, as our eventual replacement. Every advancement in silicon intelligence is now measured against the bootloader timeline, with many wondering how much longer the startup code of humanity is required to run. Public perception of Musk has settled into a strange kind of reverence mixed with fear. He is the man who looked into the abyss, saw the code, and had the audacity to tell the rest of us what was written there. This live TV moment was the day the world grew up and realized that the future might not belong to us at all. As we reflect on the chilling clarity of that broadcast, one thing remains certain. The truth is often far more uncomfortable than the fiction we create to protect ourselves. Whether we are indeed a biological bridge to a digital god or simply a species struggling to understand its own complexity, the conversation Musk started that night in 2026 will echo for as long as there are minds, biological or otherwise, to contemplate it. The question now lies with you. Do you believe we are the masters of our destiny, or are we just the code that starts the machine? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to dive deeper into the mysteries that define our existence and the confrontations that expose the hidden layers of our reality, subscribe to the Truth Narrator. Hit the like button and share this story to keep the conversation alive. Stay curious, stay questioning, and thank you for watching.